Good evening and a very warm welcome to all of you to this evening's edition of Healing Our Minds. Healing Our Minds is a series aimed at bringing forth multidisciplinary and multi-faith reflections on the human condition so that we can together find better ways to engage with our struggles, our troubles, our disappointments, or dukkha, as Buddhism refers to it. Struggles and troubles come in all forms and sizes. Tonight, my particular struggle is with my internet connection, so my apologies if it lags or anything like that. To find a solution for tonight, we're turning to the Vedanta, and we're honored to have with us today Swami Sarvapriyananda, who is the minister and spiritual leader of the Vedanta Society of New York since January 2017. He was a Nagral Fellow at the Harvard Divinity School in 2019-20. Swamiji has played a prominent role in organizing and participating in various interfaith panels and seminars, including speaking at the World Parliament of Religions in Toronto in 2018 and at the United Nations headquarters in New York. A compelling speaker, his abiding passions for the Upanishads and psychology have led to a collection of ebooks, which are now available on Amazon Kindle. With him in conversation will be Mr. Rajiv Mehrotra, who is the honorary managing trustee of the Foundation for Universal Responsibility of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. A longtime student of His Holiness, he is also an author, and his books are available in more than 50 languages and editions. Over to Rajiv.
Thank you, Aparna. Pranam, Swamiji. I am deeply blessed several times over to be here to in my sort of, how do I put this, as a seeker, to learn from you. I must so say a few personal words. Celebrating the Ramakrishna order and the Vedanta tradition that you represent here with my own, connect with it. I was deeply blessed and privileged to have been a student of Swami Ranganathananji Maharaj, and from whom I received Diksha. And I say this because in these extremely fractured times, people often ask me that, well, you continue to have great loyalty and affection to the Ramakrishna mission, and yet you are a student of the Dalai Lama and manage one of his institutions. And I think it is a great tribute, really, to both. And one of the great joys and pleasures of my life and great learnings of my life, that my first teacher and my now root guru, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, became good friends. And I was able to have the great blessing and privilege to moderate a conversation between them. And His Holiness visited Belur, and they stayed in touch. And I think that was a great testimony to both the Ramakrishna mission and, of course, His Holiness, who has acknowledged, and I remember at the Vivekananda centenary celebrations, he talked about his great debt to Thakur Sri Ramakrishna, who had in his own lifetime, being an avatar, engaged in the various rituals and practices of the diversity of Hinduism, but also of Islam and Christianity. So I think these are two crucial pillars of my life, and I think demonstrating of the discourse that our planet so sorely needs, and the spirit in which we have been organizing these fortnightly Friday evening talks to learn from each other and to send out the message that of inclusiveness and not merely tolerance, but celebrating diversity. So, and you honor that spirit so very eloquently, and you're now sort of head of the Vedanta Center, like, of course, in all of the Ramakrishna mission, but it was this Vedanta Center that Swami Vivekananda himself established during his visit to the United States. So you are part of a very hallowed lineage, and it is a deep privilege on behalf of the Foundation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to welcome you here this evening. I'm going to plunge in to the aspiration of this talk and our conversation this evening, which really is that a time of, we're having this conversation and meeting together in the shadow of a terrible war in Ukraine. We are barely, recovering from COVID. The rates of depression and anxiety have soared, and not only from our personal lived experience, but what is happening around us in these cataclysmic times. So as a sadhaka, I would come up to you and say, Swamiji, I am lost, I am bewildered, I don't sleep at night, I experience anxiety, and I really don't know how to deal with this and cope with it. And so what advice would you give me? We'll go into the larger picture, but right now, this is the pressing question that many of us confront.
Thank you, Rajiv ji, and thank you for having me on this program. I'll just take this opportunity to say that today is actually auspicious. It is the birthday of Sri Ramakrishna. So 4th of March this year in the Indian calendar would be the birthday of Sri Ramakrishna. And your special association with the Ramakrishna order, especially with revered Swami Ranganathananda ji. I remember the first time I came to know about you was watching you interview Swami Ranganathananda ji many years ago. So that interview is actually available on YouTube. If you search for Rajiv Mehrotra, Swami Ranganathananda, you'll get that interview. There's a personal connection there too for me, because I was initiated into sannyasa by revered Swami Ranganathananda ji Maharaj. Yes, so these are the two great traditions which are sort of foundational for India's very ancient and very rich spiritual heritage, Buddhism and Hinduism. Of course, with another very ancient tradition, Jainism, and a much more modern tradition, Sikhism. Now, the question about what can we do from a spiritual perspective to confront these huge challenges, the COVID challenge, which hopefully we are emerging from now, and immediately you're hit with this new crisis. So what can spirituality do? I think the Buddha, he explained it beautifully. What can spirituality do? What is it meant for? So the story goes that one of the bhikshus, one of the monks, asked the Buddha, but you told us that the nature of suffering is old age, disease, death, and then you are looking for a solution to that suffering, and I suppose you have found it, and that's what you're teaching us. And yet we are all getting old. The old age is coming for us, disease is coming for us, and inevitably death, as we are. So you are too. You, the Buddha, you're also getting old. And we know inevitably Buddha's body succumbed to disease, and then he passed. So how is it that you have overcome suffering? Where is the solution for suffering here? Old age, disease, and death are still here. And the Buddha's answer was remarkable. He said, the nature of suffering is like a man hit by an arrow and by a second arrow. The first arrow, and just imagine the shock. You're hit by an arrow, the pain of it, and then immediately you're hit by a second arrow. He says that the first arrow is what the world throws at you, so which is old age, disease, death, war, and COVID, and whatnot. The second arrow is our reaction to it. As you mentioned, the anxiety, the sleeplessness, the uneasiness, our reaction to this what the world has thrown at us. And then he points out, the Buddha points out, that most of our suffering comes from that second arrow. And it's easy to see that. The same problem, two different people handle it differently. same disease, same old age, same relationship problems, same economic problems. You'll see different people handle it differently, depending on the quality of the mind. Upon the training of the mind, the reaction is different. And the suffering is also different. So it's a second arrow. Our reaction to the events of the world, what the world throws at us, our reaction to the first arrow, that causes maximum suffering. And the Buddha said that what I have taught you will help you to overcome the suffering caused by that second arrow, not the first one. The first one will continue to happen. Like a gentleman, he said, I can't do much about the first one. So this is the nature of all spirituality. What spirituality can do and what it cannot do is these two arrows and deal with the nature of suffering, which is actually caused by the second one, our reaction to what is happening.
I think the challenge, Swamiji, is that
yes,
we are impatient. And when the second arrow strikes, we are already, in a sense, felled and find it very difficult and challenging to get up and prepare for the other second arrows that will follow. And then people would say, well, it's all very well to say this is Maya or Shunya or whatever our philosophical framework tells us. So this is karma. I mean, right now I'm desperate. These arrows are hitting me left, right, and center. And you're a minister, and you must be getting people who are coming in at this time in this sense of desperation. And so very often we anguish about what is it that we can say and do. I mean, I must sort of, as a suffix, say, of course, you're absolutely right. And, who am I to say you're right? You are. And in my limited understanding, that it is about training our mind. The Bhagavad Gita tells us that, the mind can be our best friend when kept under control and our worst enemy when we lose it. Or I think Swami Vivekananda compared the restless mind to a monkey that is not only drunk with the wine of desire, but also, second arrow, stung by the scorpion of jealousy and taken over by the demon of pride, etc., etc., etc. But it takes so much hard work to arrive at it. And so, I mean, this is asking you the impossible. I mean, we're asking you for an alternative to popping a pill.
Well, yes and no, actually. It does take hard work and sustained effort over a long time, and it does not. I'll tell you how it does and how it does not. First, how does it not take long and sustained effort? It's actually, crucially, about a change in our paradigm. The first thing is to recognize that what is happening now is not unique. It has happened in the past, it's happening now, and it will continue to happen in the future. The very nature of this world is suffering. That was the first truth, the first noble truth of the Buddha. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says, Prapya imam asukham lokam bhajasva mam. Is having come to this world, and he describes the world as asukham lokam, the unhappy world. So somehow the very nature of the world is not conducive to lasting or profound happiness in the way we experience it first, in our unreflective contact with the world. And the word that Krishna uses, asukham, in Bengali, asuk means illness, which is particularly relevant for this time. This world of, let's say, illness, not just suffering. Asuk is illness. And the solution, Sri Krishna says, bhajasvamam, worship the Lord, or worship me in the sense of worship the divinity. That means spirituality is the deep solution for this. Now, what is this paradigm shift? What can you do, like popping a spiritual pill, which makes a huge difference right away? The central paradigm shift here is that I do not look to this asukham lokam, this world of misery and unhappiness, for fulfillment. It's bound to disappoint me. I make enlightenment my goal. What the Buddha's quest was, what in today's age Vivekananda's quest was what transformed Narendranath Datta into Vivekananda. That becomes my quest. And it's not too big a thing. You might think, oh, Buddha, Vivekananda, it's tremendous beyond our capacity. It isn't. In fact, in Buddhism, in Jainism, Hinduism, everywhere, moksha, nirvana, or kaivalya, they are all, these are actually the goal for all human beings. So it is entirely within our reach. And in fact, not only should we aim at it, we must aim at it. That's seen as, typically it's across these traditions, that's seen as the goal of human life. Now, the moment we do that enlightenment is my goal, moksha, nirvana, God realization, whatever you call it, that is my goal, a huge change comes in my perspective. Then I am not looking to this world, to this particular limited life for for my entire satisfaction. That if things go well for me, then I'll be happy. If everybody treats me nicely all the time, then only I'll be happy. But when you state it outright like that, it sounds silly. But that's somehow our implicit assumption, in our minds, that things must really go well for me. It will not go well for us. It is again the central insight of Buddhism, that this is a world of continuous change, a world of flux. And notice, our happiness, when we depend on this world for our happiness, then it depends on a particular set of circumstances. My health must be good, I must be young and handsome and beautiful, and people must be nice to me, and I must be rich, and I must have lots of Facebook likes, and so on. There's a whole list of things which must be perfect for me to be happy. But suppose even if I do attain this set of almost impossible parameters for happiness, because it's a world of change, the moment I attain this set of circumstances for happiness, it will change. So the next moment I'll be unhappy. It takes very little to make us unhappy, and it takes a lot to make us happy. So everything might be going very well in this body, but if in one tooth I have a toothache, then I'll be unhappy, no matter that 99.9% of processes in this body are going perfectly well. So we recognize this, that this world, you cannot go to it with a begging bowl and say, make me happy. It won't work. It's upon a fundamentally mistaken assumption about the nature of this world. I think there, Veda, yes.
No, sorry, please. No, I was going to say,
I think there, yes, go on.
No, you're first.
Okay, so I was saying that I think there, Vedanta and Buddhism, they have this common understanding about the basic nature of this world, that it cannot give us lasting, deep, profound satisfaction. Once that is recognized, and we recognize that there is a spiritual solution to the problems of this world, then this paradigm shift itself, it makes a huge difference in our lives. I remember this professor, Professor Parimal Patil at Harvard University. He teaches Indian philosophy in Emerson Hall at Harvard University. He asked this question related to what you were asking. Why should, he said, let me put a problem to you, Swamiji. Why should anybody engage in spiritual pursuits if it's so difficult? If so few people attain enlightenment, why should we pursue this? And I said, I'll give you two answers. I gave him two answers, and he gave me a third answer. And I'll just put all these three answers before you right now. So the first answer, I said, it is not that very few people will get enlightenment. In the big picture, everybody ultimately is going to be enlightened. Because if our very nature is Brahman, what could possibly prevent us or check us from someday attaining to the full realization of our nature? The second answer I gave was that once you have tasted spiritual life, once you have made this very sublime thing your goal, what could compare to it? So no matter how difficult it is or how far it seems, it is so wonderful, so high and noble and sublime, you will pursue it. And then he gave a third answer. He said, these two are very good, but they're rather theoretical. The professor said, I'll give you a practical reason why one should pursue this spiritual life. It's because quite apart from that ultimate goal of nirvana, moksha, whatever it is, you get benefits from this day to day, throughout our lives. And this is what really keeps people on the spiritual path. The daily benefits of meditation, of scriptural study, of reflection, of devotion, of service. The benefits, you don't have to wait till some ultimate metaphysical goal of nirvana or moksha is attained. You get benefits in terms of peace, of meaningful existence, of being blessed yourself and being a blessing to others. So yes, this is what I wanted to share. The first thing is this paradigm shift. Who am I? I am not just this one individual among many, buffeted by the ever-changing winds of this ocean of samsara. I am a spiritual seeker. This internal shift. I think almost everybody here, even if they don't put it in these terms, almost everybody who is attending a program like this would have made this choice somewhere, either deliberately or unconsciously, have sort of come into this path. Yes.
So I was going to say that what you're really saying is that if we can recognize the true nature of reality, and the true nature of reality is been sort of covered by a veil of ignorance. And so if that veil of ignorance is lifted, then we see the true nature of reality. The first arrow that strikes, and then we can reach out to the second arrow. And the genius of our heritage, and I think this is what, of course, Thakur was doing through all his sadhanas, was demonstrating the practices that make it possible. That it is not enough to be told that this is so, because then that is in the realm of knowledge. It has to move to understanding and realization so that it becomes a reflexive response. Because very often, when we are in the sort of, how do I put it, there's a wonderful phrase called spiritual materialism. When we are sort of, drowning in spiritual materialism and the idea of it, or the image of it, or the externality of it, when confronted with that provocation of the second arrow, we panic. And so it is a long process. I mean, there may be payoffs as on the way that we feel stronger and better. So I was looking for some. Of course, Swamiji has sort of most eloquently, summed up, for our times, the four yogas of Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga, etc. And so that depending on our mental proclivities, we take different paths and different methods to be able to experience that. And in a sense, that is what the Buddha was doing, that he engaged in the sadhanas of his time, sat down under a tree and engaged in another kind of sadhana, that he saw the true nature of reality, which he then found difficult to articulate. And one of the great traps for practitioners is to get stuck with the concepts and without them having translated into the lived experience of the true nature of reality. And so you had Thakur engaging in the practices that would yield to that. And then Swamiji, who was sort of spreading the message out into the larger world, sort of elegantly articulated them in these four yogas. So give us a sense of the method. Because, like I earlier on said, and philosophically we can say, well, I understand that everything, so much is a projection of the mind. I understand the problems of the mind, but I don't know what to do. And how do I change this paradigm? And the strength of our civilizational heritage is to provide the methods to do that.
You're right. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, if nothing else, they were very practical spiritual masters. So what mattered to them was, how can we actually implement these things in our life, get the benefit of it right here and now, quite apart from the metaphysics and the dialectics of it all. So Swami, as you said, Swami Vivekananda's famous definition of religion. Religion is the manifestation of the divinity already within us. And then the methods immediately moves on to the methods. You can do it by philosophy, by which he means Jnana Yoga, the way of knowledge. You can do it by love, by which he means Bhakti Yoga, the way of devotion. Or by, he says, by psychic control, by which he means Raja Yoga, or the path of meditation. And then Karma Yoga, he says you can do it by service, by good works, by altruistic living. Or he says by one or more or all of these, by a combination of all these yogas, and be free. And he says this is the whole of religion. Books, temples, doctrines, and churches are secondary details. Now let's take, with your permission, we'll dwell on each of these methods a little bit in detail, so to get a feel for how they are unique and how they can be combined and straight away in our lives. But again, with the background, what I said earlier is that internal paradigm shift, that I now internally define myself as a spiritual seeker. Having realized the nature of this world, now I take up these methods. Otherwise, what happens is, if I'm still a world seeker, a seeker of this material, seeker of satisfaction from materialism, then even these yogas will be pressed into service of materialism. So, having decided that I am now a seeker of enlightenment, of nirvana, whatever it is, then I engage in these practices. So these are broad practices. You will notice at least 3 of them. The Jnana Yoga, it is related to the cognitive aspect of our psychology, the cognitive powers within us, the ability to know and understand. The Bhakti Yoga, it is related to the affective domain of the human psyche, the feelings, the emotions. And then Karma Yoga, which is related to the cognitive, the will, the ability to do something. So we have these powers, the power of knowing, the power of loving, and the power of doing. And they are harnessed, they are now channeled into spiritual life by these methods. Behind it all is the power of yoga or meditation, the power of focus. All right, let's quickly take a look at each of these 4 aspects. Let's start with Karma Yoga, which was a special favorite of Swami Vivekananda's. What is its answer to our problems? What is it? How is it taking care of that second arrow? And in fact, even the first one. What Karma Yoga says, the basic insight is that work done for others, work done unselfishly, altruistically, selflessly, is actually, it leads to a greater sense of well-being, more satisfaction, more happiness than work done selfishly. Now, this is actually counterintuitive. I mean, it seems almost instinctive that if I work for myself, if I earn for myself, if I'm engaged all day long in trying to make this one happy, then that's the way to become happy, isn't it? But that doesn't work. Swami Vivekananda says that unselfishness is more pain, but it takes a mature mind to understand this. Selflessness actually leads to more satisfaction, more happiness, more peace of mind, rather than working for oneself alone. But it's not obvious. It needs to be learned in life. Either life teaches us, or if we are wise when we take these spiritual teachings to heart. So now there's a crucial insight here, that what Krishna told Arjuna, it does not require a tremendous change in your external life. I mean, do I have to, change my suit of clothes and put on a gerua like a Swami and sit in an ashram? Then only am I a yogi? Krishna told Arjuna that the whole of the Bhagavad Gita is that this philosophy goes to the person in the field of work, the householder who, while remaining a householder and engaged with the world, can become spiritual. That is the beauty of the path of Karma Yoga. So what you do in this path is that the work that we are already doing is now mentally dedicated to God. If you believe in God, That's a very big advantage. Then the worship that we do in a temple, the worship that we do in a mosque or a church, that now becomes, that same paradigm is taken to our daily life. So the work that you do in the office, the work that you do at home, in the community, all of that becomes equal to the worship done in the temple. Now, all that we are doing in life now becomes an act of worship. The kind of the sublime, purifying, ennobling feeling that one gets after a puja or after a session, a ritualistic worship, the same one, perhaps more so, one can get while writing a letter or talking to a person. This is a philosophy which transforms, which makes spirituality a 24-hour thing. You see, otherwise what happens is spirituality is always a losing proposition. For a person who is working hard in the world, has to take care of a family and obligations to the community and society, there's very little time and energy left over if spirituality is one more add-on. There was a seminar on servant leadership in some corporate setup here in the United States, and one objection was, come on, I have all these responsibilities. On top of that, I have to take in this new age stuff. I still have to become a kind of a spiritual executive. So if you make it an add-on, an extra thing, then spirituality will always be a losing proposition. There will always be very little time and energy left over for meditation. There will be very little motivation and energy left over for scriptural study. But if our 24 hours, our work day, our relationships in the family, in the office can be transformed into spiritual practice, then spirituality becomes everywhere. You see, this is a very big insight into how one can make spirituality practical in one's day-to-day life. Another way, psychologically, what it does is a great deal of our unhappiness, especially today, is because of our overwhelming concern with ourselves. So this body, this mind, this is all that is most important. So the problems in this body, the problems in this mind, these are the ones that I have to tackle. This is what I think, wrong. What Karma Yoga teaches us is to reverse this, that the problems of this little body and mind do not matter. This is this whole world. There are so many people who are suffering. What can I do for them? Swami Ranganathanandaji, he would say that what is spirituality? When I close my eyes, I find peace within. When I open my eyes, my attitude is, what can I do for you? So this open my eyes, when you engage with society, what can I do for you? That is the way to peace, and that is the way to overcome anxiety. See, it's this overwhelming concern with ourselves that leads to more and more, tying ourselves into knots of despair and hopelessness and anxiety. When my whole attitude is, what can I do for you? How can I help? Then our own concerns, they diminish. This is if you look for one central moral principle in all the great traditions of the world, it's what's called the golden rule, that you treat others as you would expect them to treat you. So instead of expecting and waiting for good treatment for others, we go out there to do as much as we can for others. And miraculously, magically, we find our own despair diminishing. We find our own anxiety for our own sakes diminishing as we are engaged in this kind of action. Yes.
I'm going to just interrupt, I think, because there are a couple of very sort of crucial issues that you raised. One, of course, is the obligation to believe in divinity. And what form? So there are two questions. That is there a secular alternative to this? And the second is that the nature of that divinity. So Thakur, worshipped Makali, and even someone like Swamiji, found the experience of deep understanding of this true nature of reality, and so had to ask Thakur that give me a glimpse. Help me experience it. So, the pure unilateral process was not adequate in order to achieve this all-encompassing understanding of reality. So there are really two questions. One is that the imperative for divinity and the particular form that that divinity should take. And the second is really this aspect, it's still needed, the intervention of blessing, grace, or however you want to describe it, and whether this aspiration is achievable by unilateral human effort.
That's a very good question. Let me take up the first one. And that's relevant because the moment you say, or somebody says that karma yoga is worship of God in all beings through service, it's a wonderful doctrine, but it's predicated on our belief in God. So I remember attending this a wonderful interfaith program many years ago in Nanded, organized by the Sikhs on the 300th anniversary of Gutta Gaddi, where Guru Gobind Singh made the Guru Granth Sahib take the place of the Guru. So there were all these theistic traditions, Christians, and there was a rabbi from New York actually who had gone to Nanded, and the Sikhs themselves talking about God and worship of God. And there was this whole, there's a group of 3 or 4 lamas who had been sent by His Holiness. So they were sitting at the back and smiling sweetly, because from their tradition, talking about God and worship of God is not relevant. There is no particular ultimate transcendent deity whom we are supposed to worship. So this question arises. We'll take it up a little more later when we come to Jnana Yoga. But right now, Karma Yoga, the Bhagavad Gita kind, where Karma Yoga is the worship of God. You dedicate all your actions to God. But then when you look at Karma Yoga, when Swami Vivekananda talks about it, he also talks about Karma Yoga without any reference to God. Then why do you do good if it's not a worship of God? In Swami Vivekananda's restatement of Karma Yoga, it is good to do good because it is good. Just the fact that it is good is enough reason to do good. I am reminded of Bodhicharya Avatar, of Shantideva. One should remove suffering because it is suffering. The suffering in this body and mind and the suffering in that body and mind are non-distinct. If I instinctively move to remove suffering in this body and mind, why would I not do so for the suffering in all bodies and minds? You can see immediately here, it's a restatement of the golden rule, that you do unto others as you would have them do to you. In fact, here in the United Nations, if you go in the building, in the headquarters building here, the golden rule is written carved into rock. And so that's sort of the basic moral principle of all, the common moral principle of all religious traditions of the world, theistic and non-theistic. So yes, one can, to answer your question directly, one can do karma yoga without any reference to a deity and the worship of or reference to a belief in God. If one does have belief in God, that makes it all the more sweeter, because now you are working for something or somebody you love intensely.
Sort of interrupt,
yes.
as clarification on my thought on Shantideva. I think what Shantideva was also implicitly pointing to, and was that not of suffering per se, but of the suffering of suffering. I think that's a crucial distinction. And the second one really was that what do we mean by doing good? And is it just in the doing, or is it in the intention or the motivation? Because very often we confront moral dilemmas as to, is this action good in the doing? And so it becomes and hence the idea of the Bodhisattva. And I believe that Swamiji was a Bodhisattva. And that was that the motivation of his actions was altruistic. And again, sort of, looking at the self, that all these traditions are really looking to soften our sense of the self, so that the self that suffers is no longer as obsessed with the I, me, mine, and begins to look at the other as oneself. And hence the philosophical framework of interdependence, that we are all interdependent on each other. And so our acts of altruism are actually also helping us. So it's, being wisely selfish in many ways. And while you're on karma yoga, it is an aspect of our tradition that it is also a liability to recognize. I'm just talking about the idea of karma while we're on karma yoga. And so before we move on, is that, we often think that our suffering or our experience of the suffering has to do with past actions. And studies have been done to say that people from, our traditions are able to surrender our experience of suffering to say, this is karma. And so it becomes easier for me to deal with it than to, and a karma of past life. So what can I do? I just need to let it unfold. So it is this struggle to find the impulse to do what you suggest, and which is the right thing to do, plainly, or the best thing in our self-interest and collective interest. And yet, that impulse is often elusive.
Good. You've raised so many points. I'm now beginning to write it down. So, all right. First, the Bodhisattva aspect of it. I think Swamiji was in the classic archetype of a Bodhisattva. In fact, Swami Vivekananda himself said, what did he want to do? What was he doing? What was his mission? He says, my mission in life can be put in a few words. It is to preach unto humanity their inner divinity and how to make it manifest in every movement of life. He said, my goal, is to do this, is to preach their inner divinity until the whole universe shall know it is one with God. Now, you see, this is the same motivation which makes the Bodhisattva work lifetime after lifetime, not so much for his or her own enlightenment and liberation, but for all. The enlightenment of all. The enlightenment of all may not be a practical goal to be reached in a set number of lifetimes, but the motivation is important. What are we here for? What are we doing? So yes, Swami Vivekananda, the Bodhisattva, definitely. When we come to karma yoga, immediately as you discern that behind it all lies this idea of karma. And we talked about our traditions, which means the Indic traditions, which are all karma based. For a moment, just stop and think how basic this idea of karma is to all Indian thought. One monk in Uttarakhand, in the Himalayas, pointed out that among all the Indian traditions, no matter how different they are, they all accept karma. That monk said, "Ye karmavad bahut gambhir tattva hai, Mahatma ji." This doctrine of karma is a very profound doctrine. You have Buddhists who do not believe in God. You have Hindus who are by and large theistic; they believe in God. You have Jainas who are not theistic. You have Sikhs who are deeply theistic, and all of these Indic traditions, they firmly accept karma. And the curious thing is, on this side of the world, if I talk about karma and reincarnation, let's set aside something like reincarnation, which is difficult to accept here. Even karma, I am still puzzled why people here are puzzled about karma, because it is so axiomatic to our way of thinking. After all, what is karma? It's causality. It's causality applied to human life. Is there an element of faith involved? There is, but it seems pretty reasonable. If you do not apply cause and effect, that actions have consequences, if you do not apply that, then everything becomes sort of random and meaningless. So it's a pretty reasonable doctrine to accept that things actions have consequences, causes have effects. Now, one way of, a wrong way of looking at it would be, so whatever I'm doing here has been produced by my past actions, and what can I do about it? A fatalistic approach. Swami Vivekananda was strongly against that kind of interpretation of karma. He had a very positive approach to karma. He said, what we are today is what we have made of ourselves. And what we do now goes to determine what we will be in future. So therefore, karma is basically free will. It's not something that limits free will. Practically, it may seem to do so, but it is the exercise of free will leading to this. We literally make our own destiny, not as a matter of rhetoric, not as something nice to believe, but that's what's going on all the time. We have spun this web in which we find ourselves trapped right now. All right. Now, what do we do in karma yoga? This doing good. What is it? Just the removal? What kind of suffering are you working to remove? Swami, the question is like this: people are hungry or people are sick. Is that the suffering you're trying to remove? Or if you look at Vedanta, Buddhism, they would say the root of all suffering is ignorance of our real nature. And are you working to remove that? Somebody might say that I am not really engaged with the surface symptoms. I'm going to the root of the disease and I'm trying to remove that. The problem with that is then you will have, as Swami Vivekananda saw, thousands of monks who are studying Vedanta, but completely unconcerned about the state of society around them. Why the state of society? Completely unconcerned about the well-being of the monks around them also, because it's all their karma. What can I do? I have to go to the root of it all and remove ignorance and realize I am Brahman and teach everybody that they are Brahman. So what should be the ideal? I think it's the whole spectrum. It's an attitude that I will work to remove the suffering of all beings. What suffering? All suffering. Wherever I can, in whatever way I can. If there's, as Swami Vivekananda said, that medicine and nursing for the sick, food for the hungry, education for the illiterate, and spiritual knowledge for those who are seeking it, definitely. Not just spiritual knowledge or not just social service. It's the whole spectrum. Should we move on to the next yoga? Because before, yes.
Please move on, because
before this, you asked another question, which was a prompt for me to move on to Bhakti Yoga, because you talked about this enlightenment which we are seeking. Is it possible to attain it without grace, without without the direct experience of the divinity, and that requires grace or not? So I think this is a good prompt to move on to another yoga, a very different approach to spiritual life. Here, of course, it is primarily theistic, but not entirely, because it would be wrong to say that say in a non-theistic tradition like Buddhism, especially in a Mahayana tradition like Tibetan Buddhism, it would be wrong to say that there is no devotion, there is no bhakti. No, there is. There is a great cultivation of emotions and devotion to the various deities. Bhakti Yoga, what it does is that it of course depends on faith. So Bhakti Yoga is primarily a path of faith. In Bhakti Yoga, you cannot come in and say from the very beginning that you cannot come in like Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins with a skeptical attitude. Then it won't work. Bhakti Yoga starts with a belief or a faith that God exists, God is attainable, and in fact, most worthy of pursuing God realization. We have the ability to love. Normally, what happens is this power is scattered in 1,000 different streams. It flows out into the world as desire. I want this, that, and the other thing. Then only I will be happy. Adi Shankaracharya, he says that, his favorite phrase, avidya kama karma. So our deep ignorance of our real nature as Brahman, that we are already infinite and full, we don't know that. We see ourselves as incomplete. As we see ourselves as incomplete, there arises kama, desire. And as we pursue desires, trying to fulfill desires, we engage in action, karma prompted by desire. And that leads to consequences, and we are immediately trapped in this cycle of karma. So ignorance, desire, and karma. Now, what Bhakti Yoga does is it comes in between here, that desire which flows in 100 different streams to the world. I want all these things and then I'll be happy. It doesn't work. It's entirely wrong. Even if I get all of that, I will still be dissatisfied. I mean, the richest person, here I'll say that I had a very interesting experience in the last few years. I was in Hollywood, three interesting places I lived in. I was in Hollywood for a year, and then I'm here in Manhattan, close to Wall Street. And then I was at Harvard for 1 year in Boston. Now, see, there are these three ways of becoming happy. These three places, they have a principle behind them. Hollywood is about glamour and popularity and who is famous. If you are close to the movie industry in Hollywood, you're supposed to be made it, you're supposed to be happy. If you are here in Manhattan, near Wall Street, it's not so much being famous as being rich. If you're a billionaire, you have made it. Money is important here. And when I went to Boston and stayed at Harvard, there it's not so much money. There's a lot of money there, by the way. It's the richest university in the world. But it's not so much money, it's learning. And it's the cultivation of scholarship. So if you're the head of the department, if you're the Nobel Prize winner, you're at the top of the food chain and so on. Does it work? What I was interested in was, does it work? Does fame and glamour, does it really make you happy? Does money make you happy? Does scholarship? And the answer is, it depends. These are all like zeros. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, no matter how many zeros you collect, you end up with zero. But if you have the one, then all the zeros add value to it. The one is, of course, spirituality of in whatever form. It could be bhakti, it could be knowledge, it could be meditation, it could be altruistic action, it could be Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever it is. So I found that those people who had some form of deep spirituality in them, any form, to that they added glamour or money or learning, and that was fine. But those who did not, for them it didn't work. But no matter how glamorous you are and famous you are, no matter how rich you are or learned you are, it does not lead to any lasting satisfaction. So what bhakti does is, it takes all of these desires and focuses it on the ultimate reality, on God. So instead of loving the world, we love God. Do we hate the world? Do we become indifferent to the world? No. You see God in everybody. Swami Vivekananda, he says that he who runs away from this world to meditate and die in a Himalayan cave has missed the way. He who plunges headlong into the vanities of the world has also missed the way. Then what is the way? The way is to see God in everything. This is to deify life itself. Who you are with, where you are, there you see God in everybody. So the love of God and the love of all beings through God, in and through God, that is Bhakti Yoga. And once that comes, when love comes into the heart, then you will see, I'm trying to answer your original question here. Anxiety, depression, helplessness, meaninglessness, and all of that disappears. Love is probably the noblest, the most sublime of all human emotions. Any kind of love, even human love, any kind of human love you have in the world, a personal one-to-one relationship, when there's a genuine feeling of love, you see, it tends to, at least psychologically, all problems sort of diminish. They pale in front of the glory, the glow of love. Now imagine that love collected from the world and given to the divine. Human love often almost inevitably leads to frustration and unhappiness, but love given to God does not. So Bhakti Yoga, when love arises in the heart, it can overcome meaninglessness, it can overcome anxiety very easily. So that's the second yoga. And there, of course, God is central. You can't start off by doubting God. Faith is central. Grace of God is central. This is the other question which you asked. We depend on the grace of God. But Sri Ramakrishna said, the winds of grace are ever blowing. You raise your sail. Remember, he used to live near a river, the Hooghly, which is basically the Ganga. So you would see these little boats sailing up and down the river. And he would notice the boatman who raised his sails skillfully. He caught the wind which was blowing and effortlessly he sailed up and down the river. Similarly, the wind of grace is always blowing, but you raise your sails to catch that, to take advantage of the grace of God.
Before you move on,
yes.
I'm going to interrupt again, because there are two sort of interesting things, because we have been cross-referencing Buddhism, is that, and I think that many people from outside our traditions find the idea of locking in a divinity problematic. And so I think the Buddhist solution was that we create our own gods out of shunya. And so, does God exist? Who is God? Is a question that is ducked. And so by creating a God out of shunya, Buddhists are able to practice all the elements and the stages that you're talking about. And so the God becomes real during the time of practice to impact one. And at some point, as you know, time races by and you have some 2 yogas to cover, is that I think that we frequently refer to enlightenment, and so the question often begs itself: what is enlightenment? And I think that in my my struggles as a student, and I've sort of followed the idea that these are non-conceptual experiences which are very difficult to articulate. And in my own struggles in meditation, you perhaps have a little time for Raja Yoga. Whenever I have tried to articulate and explain it, my teachers have discouraged me from doing so that you don't get frozen in the concept of it, but are able to aspire to the experience of it. So when you hold forth the ideal of enlightenment as the destination of all of this, what do we say to our brothers and sisters, including me, that enlightenment is? We may be able to say what it may do for us, I don't know. So please weave that in. I think that's a very important, because it remains ambiguous and fuzzy, as some kind of, blissed out, or from Timothy Leary, what people did with psychedelics and they had these experiences, or whatever it was. So what is this thing that we're aspiring to that everybody talks about?
Right. That gives me the perfect cue to move into Jnana Yoga, actually, which is really my favorite, as people might guess from most of my talks. So I'll spend some time on that before we briefly touch upon Raja Yoga. Now, from a Jnana Yoga perspective, it is in some sense the polar opposite of the Bhakti Yoga perspective. Remember, we are all moving towards that same reality, whether through Bhakti or Jnana. But what the Jnana Yoga does is, it does not expect us to start with faith in a deity, faith in God. It says, just look at your own experience. It's interesting to contrast, say, the mystical yogic path with the path of philosophy or knowledge, or the Jnani's path. What is the contrast? The yogic path, in contrast to the bhakti path, says that, no, not faith, experience. So you, like Vivekananda was the classic yogi. He goes to Sri Ramakrishna and says that, can I see God? Vivekananda used to say, if I have an immortal soul, I must feel it. If God exists, I must be able to see God. Now, what's underlying that? It's the cry for experience. And that's peculiarly the spirit of our age. It's not really an age of faith. It's too late and in the day to demand unquestioning faith. But experience is what people would, they would, as you said, Timothy Leary and others, even in their wildest experiments, what they were looking for was experience, mystical experience. In contrast to the yogis' search for mystical experience to confirm the truths, the truth claims of religion, in contrast to that is now we have a third approach, bhakti approach, yogic approach, the jnani approach. The jnani approach is not mystical experience. Mystical experience also, but more importantly, ordinary, quotidian experience, our day-to-day life. The big advantage here is, if you claim mystical experience, the problem is mystical experience is not shared by everybody. And a neuroscientist might come along and say that, I have no doubt that you are experiencing it, but it's being caused by the drugs that are in your system and you are stimulating your brain cells, or it's a little stroke you have on one side of your brain and that's why you're getting this. A neuroscientist will immediately come and give his version of an old objection. What Sri Ramakrishna faced was exactly the same thing. There was a group of people who said, he's mad. He's just a madman. So the madman argument is basically translates into our 21st century neuroscience argument against the reality of spirituality, that it's something in your brain, and that's why you feel you're perceiving it, but it's not true. It's not true because it's not shared. Whereas common day-to-day experience is shared. This is the elegant and powerful approach of Jnana Yoga. It says, forget mystical experience. Take your day-to-day experience, by which I mean the experience of waking, dreaming, deep sleep. By which I mean the experience of the basic structure of all experience, subject and object, drashta and drishya, or just the experience of being this sentient being, a physical existence, annamaya, a pranic existence, pranamaya, mental, you experience your own mind, manomaya, experience the intellect, the vijnanamaya, and the blankness beyond the intellect, the anandamaya. Just these experiences, which everybody has. In just a human being, you have these experiences. And what Jnana Yoga does is, it takes just these experiences available to everybody and then leads us step by step to see the reality behind them, the reality which through and in which we have these experiences. And that reality is, in Vedantic terms, Advaitic terms, is pure awareness or pure consciousness, chit, or which is synonymous with pure being, sat, which is synonymous with pure bliss, ananda, sat, chit, ananda, which is existence itself, consciousness itself, bliss itself. Here you will see, speaking to what you said, a difficulty of articulating it, we are already using words like sat, chit, ananda, pure being, pure awareness, pure consciousness. This is not a normal way of speaking. I mean, I can talk about a pen and paper and a cloth. These are things which exist. But if you say existence itself, what does it mean? We're already talking in metaphysical terms. And that's unavoidable, because language was not meant to deal with this reality, the ultimate reality. Language comes much later. It's meant to deal with this world of our experience. But nevertheless, because it is our own reality, because it is self-luminous, it shines forth. In Upanishadic language, that shining, everything else shines. By its light, everything is lit up. Tameva bhantam anubhati sarvam, tasya bhasa sarvamidam vibhati. Kathopanishad. Because it's self-revealing, it's not that it cannot be known without articulation. Even if you cannot express it in language, it's still evident. So what Vedanta does is, it takes up these experiences which are available to everybody, waking, dreaming, deep sleep. In the Mandukya Upanishad, you're taken to the background awareness of all of this, the Turiya. In the Drigdrishya Viveka, you analyze your experience of seeing and the seer and the seen, and then you go back to the ultimate seer, the witness consciousness. Or the Panchakosha Viveka of Taittiriya Upanishad, where you just start with the body, and step by step, at each point, nothing that is not available for public, for your own experience. The prana, the mind, the intellect, which is admitted by everybody. And using this alone, the path of knowledge says that I can show you your own real nature, which is pure consciousness, pure existence, pure bliss, and it can be demonstrated to your entire satisfaction. And at that point, it is an entirely unproblematic existence. So at least from your perspective, you have solved all problems. Because, for example, that reality does not die. So your greatest problem, the fear of death, our fear of eventual dissolution, that goes away. That being, that awareness is not subject to old age or disease. So that problem drops away. That awareness is not subject to the ups and downs of the mind. The mind can go through ups and downs. It can even be anxious, and you know deep within you are all right. So from at least the personal level of the enlightened person, all problems are solved forever by this insight. This insight is called enlightenment. I'd just like to add here, all of this will sound a little, it can make a Mahayanist, especially a Tibetan Buddhist, little queasy and uneasy, and all this talk about ultimate realities and pure consciousness and pure being. It seems like the bugbear of Tibetan Buddhism, the reification problem, but actually it isn't. I'll refer a book which I read recently, um, Meditation and Progressive Stages of Emptiness, where the concept of shunyata is analyzed, is explained in 5 stages, starting with the Shravakayana, the Theravada understanding of shunyata, then moving on to the Chittamatra, the mind-only school understanding of shunyata, then moving on to the Madhyamaka, and then also there the Swatantrika and the Prasangika Madhyamaka understanding of shunyata, and then to a little known aspect of Tibetan Buddhism, which is the Shentong approach, which is, they talk about pure awareness, which is so Advaitic. So there I see that the 2 traditions meet. The 2 traditions are clearly different. It's like climbing up the same mountain from different paths, but they do come together. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Swamiji, that we're running out of time, but you have to give us a flavor of Raj Yoga, and I will just sort of point to a few things that came up for me. And I think that the aspiration of all the different religious traditions and approaches, whether it is Buddhism or Advaita or Bhakti or Islam or what have you, is it useful to the individual? So that he can find, for want of a better word, happiness. We use happiness with a great sort of reservation, because there is a whole American concept of happiness, and you talked about happiness in Hollywood, New York, and Boston as being different kinds of aspirations. So whatever it may be, call it equanimity or what have you. So is it useful? And I think that softens the fragmentation and the divide, that my way or the highway. So if I find a particular view of shunya, or a particular view of the divine useful, so be it. And I think that was what, in my limited understanding, Thakur's aspiration was when he did the different sadhanas. He was demonstrating that each one of them had a place. Dvait, Tadvait, Tantra, Islam, whatever it was. And I think it's extremely important that message goes out into the world today, that this is what we find useful, but you might find something else useful. And that there are some common parameters, such as you have mentioned, altruism, compassion, concern for the others. But, time is running out, so you'll have to be brief, but there is so much learning from you that this should have been a 6-hour session instead of a modest, 1 hour. As I always sort of describe myself as a struggling aspirant, far away from understanding the truth. In a sense, it is Raja Yoga, which is the most sort of, in some ways, the most detailed articulation of technique or practice. I mean, all of it is practice. Much more, how to put it, structured, tangible process. So a quick overview of the practices of Raj Yoga, for us, yes.
Yes, I understand. Sometimes I was thinking that we say so many things. Is it, there's an American, very useful American term, the takeaway. So what is the takeaway from all this? Can we actually have it in one word, not even one sentence? And yes, the takeaway from this is, what is useful in all of this? In one word, in Karma Yoga, what is useful is selflessness, not selfishness, selflessness. That works. In Bhakti Yoga, love, not desire. That works. That's useful. In Jnana Yoga, self-knowledge, not other knowledge. So that's what is being taught here, and that's useful. In Raja Yoga or Dhyana Yoga, the way of meditation, one word, focus, not distraction. You want to take away one word, that's focus. I think that word encompasses all of Raja Yoga. It's basically the training of attention. We had a session on meditation, a whole retreat on meditation a couple of years ago at the Garrison Institute in upstate New York. And we reflected on different traditions of meditation, meditation in Kashmiri Shaivism, the mindfulness Buddhist meditation technique, the dualistic bhakti tradition of meditating on your beloved deity, and the Vedantic tradition of nididhyasana, Vedantic, that aham brahmasmi, to reflect on that, stay with that. But what was common to all of them? We found what was common to all of them was the training of attention. And this, I don't need to go into it right now, but this is very much needed, especially in societies like this. It's a very distracted society. Attention is the most important currency, which it's not Vedanta which is just saying it, or Buddhism, or Patanjali Yoga. It is Wall Street and Silicon Valley which is saying it. Now they talk about the attention economy. They're all out to grab your attention because that translates into money for them. Training of the attention, conserving attention, it's the most precious thing that we have in life. That is Raja Yoga. And Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is probably the most ancient manual of meditation. Just by the way, you talked about the medicinal practices which you'll be taking up. And I was thinking how interesting. Patanjali, in our tradition, the Rishi, the sage Patanjali, is supposed to be the source of 3 kinds of medicine. Medicine for the body, Ayurveda. So Patanjali is a great contributor to Ayurveda. Then medicine for the speech, for correcting wrong speech. Patanjali is famously known as the great commentator on Panini's sutras on Sanskrit grammar, the author of the Mahabhashya. So he corrects wrong speech, medicine for the speech. And medicine for the mind, the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, which is the manual of meditation. Yeah, so this is what I wanted to say.
The temptation to keep you here all morning and all evening for us is huge, but I guess we have to be considerate and pray very hard that we will have you back for what really is just feels like an appetizer, given your vast erudition, wisdom, and experience. It's over to Aparna. We have about 10 minutes. So we've already, sort of kept Swamiji here for far longer than we had promised to me at the day to go ahead. So a quick set of questions, and then I will just do a vote of thanks at the end. Over to you, Aparna.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have lots of questions for you, Swamiji, but in the interest of saving time, I'm going to try and stay with questions that, pertain more to what we spoke about already today. So there's one question from Dr. Vani Bajpai, who wants to understand a little more about the idea of karma. And I think in what we discussed right now as well was that, there are different ways to look at karma, but essentially it is cause and effect. But I think in the way in which it is commonly perceived or popularly perceived, it's almost like, it's a little stick that somebody is holding, to keep everybody in check, so when something bad happens to someone, we say, oh, that's the karma speaking, or if something bad happens to us, we're like, oh, what bad karmas did we do for us to have to go through whatever we're going through, right? So if you could speak a little more about the idea of karma and how perhaps we can take away this disciplinarian sort of, imagination that we seem to have about karma and to take it back to the space of cause and effect.
Right. I'll just say one thing here. Swami Vivekananda, he used karma in a very positive sense. As I said, it is what we have made of ourselves. So if it is their bad karma that somebody else is suffering, then it's your karma to help that person. So karma is used in 2 senses, in sense of what we do and in the sense of the results of what we have done. So if somebody is suffering, you can't dismiss it by saying it's bad karma. It is your karma now to help. When this group of people, the Cow Protection Society, came to Swami Vivekananda and asked for his help in protecting cows, and he said, it's a noble cause, but I will first work for the suffering humanity. How about people in your province? They are at that time they're suffering from famine, and those gentlemen said, quite unconcerned, they said, oh, it's their bad karma. And Swami Vivekananda was furious at this. He said, if it is their bad karma to suffer, it's your karma to help. So yes, that would be my basic answer to this.
I'd like to add to that. I think that in contemporary vocabulary, karma is seen as the imprints in our consciousness of the motivations behind our actions, which create predispositions for subsequent actions and our subsequent experience, as Swamiji so eloquently explained, the subsequent engagement with what unfolds in our lives. So no karma is good or bad per se. If you look at it in the larger context, that the objective of the human condition is to go through a process of evolution through life's experiences so that we attain nirvana or enlightenment. So if we can begin to look at karma like that, it will soften our sense of karma being good, bad, or a judgment on who we are today based on what we were in the past. And also that causality is, karmic causality is often mistaken as being singular, that I do X and so Y follows. It is an accumulation, a cross-fertilization of different intentions in which when they fructify in action, they become much more intense.
Right.
Okay.
We have another interesting question from Robert, who asks that, if this is, a world of illusion that we're living, everything is Maya, then is not the decision to seek enlightenment just another form of that illusion? We replace other desires with the desire to get enlightened.
Absolutely. But this is what will be called a skillful means. See, the basic fact is we are suffering. If we were not suffering, everything was perfect, then there would be no need to seek for anything else. But things are not perfect, and things have not worked out for us even after lifetimes of effort. So here is this promise that you can solve these problems. The Indologist Heinrich Zimmer said, contrary to appearances, the philosophies of India are entirely optimistic. They sound pessimistic, but they are optimistic because they say that a solution to the human condition is possible. The solution to the human problem is possible. So we can go beyond suffering. This is the promise. Yes.
I think that, sorry, I'm barging in too much, but I think this issue of is an illusion, I think is perhaps an incorrect use of the language. And I think that Buddhism is attempting to explain it by the idea of shunya. And shunya is often confused with emptiness or the absence of all matter or all dimensions of reality. I think what we're really saying is to soften our sense of grasping, to suggest that everything is dynamic, it is not frozen, it is dependent on dynamic causes and conditions. So when we grasp at something as having an immutable, independent existence, we suffer because it is in a constant sense of change and is constantly dynamic. So I think it is because we misunderstand that, and we certainly don't experience it. Certainly I don't experience it in the realm of realization and only see it as knowledge, that I struggle with the sense of duality. And it is really the Dvait and Advait, the dual and non-dual. And this is how they address this problem. And again, we use whichever of the two philosophies we relate to emotionally and intellectually.
And even if you consider the nature of illusion itself, suppose you say it's all illusion, but what is an illusion? If you're talking about an illusion, then you must talk about reality also. It is the reality appearing otherwise, which is called an illusion. In Shankaracharya's language, atasmin tad buddhi. What is not there, you see there. There is no snake there. It's a rope, but you see a snake there. But if you're seeing a snake, if that's an illusion, if somebody comes and points out to you, that's an illusion, immediately you're going to ask them, what's the truth? So wherever there is an illusion, wherever there is an appearance, there must be reality. So if this world is an appearance, then there must be reality. And where is this reality? Where there is the illusion. So if the snake is an illusion and the rope is the reality, you can ask the question, where is the rope? There itself. What you are seeing as the snake is actually a rope. What we are seeing as the world is actually Brahman. That is basically the essence of Advaita Vedanta. So the moment, if you say it's all illusion, great. That means you are actually in the presence of reality. You are in the presence, you are immersed in reality. That transition from not recognizing reality to recognizing reality, is enlightenment.
Right. Another very interesting question from Pema, who asks that sometimes, if you think you're on the spiritual path, there is a tendency to start judging those who are not, because I think somewhere you begin to think that you're superior to others who are still, sort of in illusion and mind. And you have somehow, begun to see the true nature of reality, and you think you're superior to them. And that again is just an example of the ego sort of, coming in. So what would you sort of say to that? How would you respond to that?
Don't worry about it and don't judge. Because all the other persons, the moment you see this true nature of reality, that all is Brahman, I am Brahman and all is Brahman, then the persons you are judging are Brahman. Are you judging Brahman? Are you judging God? No. So don't. Just give it up and don't worry too much about it also.
Yeah, again, this really is a question of how to put it in Buddhist terms. When we don't look at a kind of when you start looking at Atman and you start looking at the flow of Atman as a singular flow, as opposed to a more universal consciousness. So I think that the different traditions have evolved in different ways to meet different cultural, social, psychological needs. And so it's important that we don't get locked into the certitude of our particular perspective and point of view. And I think that will help diminish the ego, that we are somehow superior to the other person. Because I'm sure that it is possible for someone who's agnostic, atheist, and has never done a day's practice or meditation in their lives to be perfectly good, compassionate, altruistic, good human beings. And it's extremely important that we recognize this.
Right. We have another question from Vivek Mittal. And he asks, is there any one particular question that we can ask ourselves every day to keep us on the path to enlightenment?
For a Vedantist, that's very easy. Who am I? But in terms of the practices we talked about, that's a good question. Let me put it in terms of 4 questions. Am I centered in the who am I, or am I just scattered in the world outside in the other? That's 1. Am I focused or distracted? Am I loving or desiring? Am I selfish or selfless? These 4 questions.
Right. There's one more question again from Dr. Vani Bajpai, who's asking whether we should exhaust our existing vasanas or should we replace them with better ones?
Oh, always replace them. That is the skillful way of doing it. You cannot exhaust vasanas. This was a very ancient and common understanding to all the Indian traditions. It's like the classic example of pouring ghee on a blazing fire. So a fire is blazing and you want to put it out, and you try to douse it by pouring fuel into it, ghee into it. It will blaze even further. So this was an understanding which came through thousands of years of reflection on the human condition. Can we fulfill all our desires by keeping on fulfilling desires? We cannot. And let's look at our lives. We are 20 years old or 40 or 60 or 80 years old. We have tried to be happy by fulfilling our desires till this point. Have we succeeded? No, it doesn't work.
Well, I have to thank Swamiji, not merely for being so very articulate, but for who you are. Because I think that we have learned so much from who you are and how you have expressed who you are. Because ultimately, it is very easy to go through the rhetoric of spirituality. But you embody it so eloquently. And I think that picking up from where you're located in Manhattan, and I have lived there, I just want to end with a quote from the Gita, which says, yoga is not for him who eats too much, nor for him who eats too little. It is not for him, O Arjuna, who sleeps too much, nor for him who sleeps too little, for whom is temperate in his food and recreation, temperate in his exertion at work, temperate in sleep and waking, yoga puts an end to all sorrow. So I think we need to be temperate in our sadhanas, because we have seen so many people victim to intemperance and practice, and suddenly everything collapses, and then the journey is abandoned and rejected, and I think that polarization happens so often, because we sometimes try too hard. And as I began this discussion, that I was seeking from you an instant solution, an instant answer. And I think what we have learned so much from you in the measured, patient way that you have shared your wisdom is that practice is not just in talking, discussing, or debating, but doing. It is in the doing, and the secret of all doing is just to do. And thank you for showing us so many parts. And I will just close with a request to say, I hope that we will have you back amidst us for a more extended conversation. And thank you very much, Swamiji. And as I started this discussion, it has meant so much to me personally, going back to my own roots and youth with Swami Ranganathananda, that I have been able to learn so much from you. And it almost seems as his voice resonates through you. Thank you. This has been
Thank you for having me. And this is a delight. And we'll do it again. We'll do it again sometime.
Great blessing. And thank you all for being a part of this journey of ours. Good morning. Good night. Thank you.